El día de hoy nos va a hablar sobre la literatura digital en Francia. El profesor Bouchardon es egresado de la Universidad de la Sorbona, en el que se tituló con una tesis sobre narrativa literaria interactiva. Actualmente realiza su investigación sobre las figuras de manipulación. Está muy interesado en el tema de interactividad. Entre sus obras se encuentran Loss of Grasp, que es la que presenta el día de hoy, Opacité. Ambas obras serán integradas en la exhibición que se organiza en este evento. Y también queremos mencionar que es autor de numerosos artículos y libros, y más recientemente en el libro Les valeurs heuristiques de la littérature numérique, el valor heurístico de la literatura electrónica. Los dejo, Serge Bouchardon con nosotros. Bienvenue au Mexique, Serge.
Muchas gracias a Nohelia por la presentación.
De nada.
Y muchas gracias a Susana, María, Andrea, Cynthia y Roberto por la invitación. So now I will have to continue in English. I would have preferred in French, but and I will start with an example, which is, as you said, Nohelia, in the exhibit, Loss of Grasp. So it's an interactive narrative which is available online in 4 languages. It's a story of a man in 6 short scenes who is losing grasp on his life. As you will see, it's interactive. The gestures contribute to the construction of meaning. It's not meant to be performed, but to be read and acted in a private way. So I might have to explain what I will be doing with the mouse, the keyboard, and the webcam. So I think in the exhibit it's in the Spanish version, and I will show the English one.
Welcome. Press the hash key.
So it's
Congratulations.
It's a kind of a joke. A sentence appears, and at first, what the reader has to do is very simple. Just have to roll over the sentence to make the next sentence appear. My entire life, I believed I had infinite prospects before me. The whole universe belongs to me, I thought. I have the choice. I control my destiny. Now another action is expected from the reader, so I can click. I am the king of the world. I will become what I want. I followed my own path. I browsed beautiful landscapes. I even went to Mexico. But for a while, I have had doubts. How can I have grasp on what happens to me? Everything escapes me, and I just lost the mouse pointer, but I can still continue to roll over the sentences. Slips through my fingers, objects, people. I feel I've lost control. For some time now, I expect but one thing. What comes next?
Hello. If you want the meeting in 10 years, press 1. In 3 hours, press 2. Now, press 3. It's time for the meeting.
So second scene. But the meeting was trumped. I only realized it later. The woman in front of me seemed so perfect, I was flabbergasted. I couldn't say anything current.
Shall we
I
go
like
for a walk?
the way you smile.
Have you lived around here for a long time?
So I used the software recognition, the voice recognition software of Windows to generate misunderstandings.
What do you do for a living? Do you often come here? Can I get you another drink?
I was distraught. I had to ask questions to reveal her. And now if I roll over, I can constitute the portrait of the woman with questions which are constitute elements of the portrait. Without my being aware of it, This stranger became my wife. We shared everything, but I never got to know her truly. Today, I still wonder who is following whom. When I love her, she loses me. 20 years have gone by since we first met. This morning, I am reading a note she left me. I am at a loss. I don't know what to make of it. Love poem or breakup note? So now I will explore the screen with my mouse. And if I move the mouse pointer to the right of the screen, the text unfolds as a love poem, and we can hear Carmen. And now if I move to the left, the order of the lines is reversed, and the text turns into a breakup note. My love has disappeared. Indifference is more vivid than ever. The charm of our encounter is more vivid than ever. Indifference has disappeared. My love, I love you. The charm of our encounter has dissolved, and the slightest misunderstanding has vanquished our love. So I can experiment through my gesture this double interpretation. What can I do? I can take it from my wife. But how can my son do this to me? He wants me to read his paper.
I don't have a hero,
But
as far back as I can remember, and
I
even
cannot
after thinking
focus on the
hard,
words.
I have never had a hero. The hero figure doesn't appeal to me, no doubt because I don't value one quality or moral value more than another. I know heroes, I can recognize them, but I don't love them nor worship them. To tell the truth, I hate fanatics. If one considers that what makes a hero is what he does, his title is a reward for his feats, his heroic actions, his uniqueness. But what is he left with once his heroic deeds are over? Nothing but the title. It can be assumed that the hero retains an aura. The action shines through him. I tend to believe that the deed has to free itself from its creator to live a life of its own. The author's offspring will meet their own audience, occasionally finding on their way a few harsh and envious reviewers.
So now what happens is if I click on the text as
You are not a model for me. You don't know me. We have nothing in common.
so as the father, can read between the lines. Fifth scene. Am I so little here? So easily deformed? My own image seems to escape me. So now the webcam just turned on, and I can distort my own image and manipulate it. So I will perform it a little bit. I feel manipulated. So the original music is by Hervé Zenida. At least the last scene. So we all want a happy ending, no? So it's time to take control again. So I move my cursor, find some guidelines, shape events, give meaning to my actions. Stop going around in circles. And I've got an input window. Now I will take control, and I will take the opportunity to thank again the organizers. So I am very happy to be here, and I thank the organizers. And of course, every key I type on, I don't control the letters that appear on the screen, so I just have to type any letter. I'm doing all I can to get a grip on my life again. I make choices. I control my emotions. The meaning of things, at last, I have a grasp. So this is a creation from 2010. Thank you. With my friend Vincent Volkert. And now I will continue with a more academic and traditional talk after this introductory example. And I've tried to be quite pedagogical. I don't know if it will be a success. We'll see. So I will focus on digital literature in France and on the filiations, the history, and the characteristics, which, of course, might not always be specific to France, but it's an opportunity for me to show some French examples. So genealogy lines can be traced, which are acknowledged by the authors themselves. Combinatorial writing and constrained writing, fragmentary writing, sound and visual writing. From the Yiking in ancient China to the Ulipo, l'ouvroir de littérature potentielle. Combinatorics has been influencing textual practices for a long time, and on the web, Bernardo Schiavetta, originally from Argentina, but he lives and writes in French, proposes Raphael, which is a multilingual poem, collage poem of quotations in various languages, which is structurally a never-ending text. And the fantasy of the infinite text or book is actually one of the fantasies of combinatorial writing. Working on another approach of combinatorics, Raymond Roussel took a particular interest in writing instructions, and by doing so, he paved the way to Oulipian constrained writing. And these filiations of constrained writing and the Oulipo is emphasized by numerous theoreticians. Nevertheless, other theoreticians like Jean-Pierre Balp underline the profound difference between literature under constraint and programmed literature. But I will not enter this debate now. And concerning combinatorial and constrained writing, the CD-ROM Machines à écrire in 1999 proposes the transposition of Raymond Queneau's and Georges Perec's works, and it was quite popular in France. Second filiation, fragmentary writing. To a certain extent, the fragment can be considered as a literary genre, proverbs, aphorisms, maxims, and in the history of modern European literature, the Romantics were the first to consider the fragment as a genre per se. In France, the Nouveau Roman in the 50s and 60s, in which fragmentary writing can also be found, had an influence on the writing of hypertextual narratives. Everything is enigmatic in the Nouveau Roman. Absence of chronology in the narrative, confusion between flashback and flash forward, fragmentation. The question of the fragment and of the link between the fragments is the heart of the hypertext issue and of hypertextual narratives. And this narrative by Lucide Boutini, I'll just show an excerpt of it in the second episode, so it's 98. I can choose the point of view of Madame or of Monsieur. So she used the technology of frames with HTML, which was quite popular in late 90s, on the web, and she plays with the confrontation of point of view in this narrative. So third filiation, from the tradition of figurative writings in the Middle Ages to the coup de dés by Mallarmé and Apollinaires calligrams, literature has sometimes privileged the material dimension of linguistic science, in particular in poetic creation. Many authors of digital literature place their work in this tradition of visual and sound writing. Which filiations can be identified? concrete poetry, specialist, visual, and animated poetry derive from this tradition. Lettrist poetry, promoted by Isidore Izou, breaks the word to keep only the letter, which becomes a sound entity. And sound poetry becomes action poetry, then performance poetry. And I mentioned here digital authors inspired by these traditions. These various filiations are obvious in the poetic works of digital literature, but also in kinetic, interactive narratives. And in this, if I can find my cursor again, in this work, Carte du Tendre, so map of the tender-hearted, there are only 3 words, moi, toi, and aimer, to love. And you will discover it online. I think I can give the PowerPoint if you want to put it on, and I can try to catch aimer, and things will happen between toi and moi, but I'll let you discover. This encounter between concrete poetry and animated poetry. So I just want to, because I will be bothered by the sound. Okay, now the history, because although filiations for digital literature can be traced, this literature has a history of its own. So let's try to give an overview of the history of digital literature, particularly in France, but of course it's not specific to France. Combinatorial experiments and automatic text generation, hypertextual narratives, animated poetry, and online collective and participative works. So the first permutational experiments with a computer go back to Theo Lutz's works in Germany and to Byron Gizin's in the United States in 1959, the same year. These works were followed in the 60s and 70s by other combinatorial works in America and in Europe. In France, we can mention La Machine à écrire, The Typewriter, by Jean Baudot in 1964. And this work is a good illustration of the notion of computer-assisted literature. Jean Baudot realized a combinatorial program, then gathered the generated texts in a book. In these examples, the computer was used to prolong previous literary approaches, and in this experimental period, the reference remained the printed or recited text. The Alamo, so literature assisted by mathematics and computers, founded in 1981, explicitly proclaimed the existence of computing literariness, asserting that combinatorial works were literary productions. And after this, combinatorics could not be the only algorithmic approach anymore. The development of the algorithmic description of a sentence, then of a text, of a narrative, together with the growing calculation power of computers, has led to a more scientific algorithmic approach. It results in the automatic text generation developed by Jean-Pierre Balp and based on his research work on the automatic synthesis of natural languages. Alain Vuillemin, a theoretician, pointed out that at the time, the poetry generated exclusively by computer remains a European phenomenon, and more specifically, French. How much time do we have, Nohelia? You have time to? Yeah, we do. Okay. Some years later, the first hypertextual narratives were born in the United States, following Afternoon of Story by Michael Joyce in 1987. And this hypertext heralded the spectacular development of the American hypertext, which would eventually reach Europe. And it was not until 1996 that the first hypertextual fiction published in French was available in CD-ROM, so 20% love more, in a collection entitled Interactive Narratives. And following this, many hypertextual narratives in French appeared on the web. Let's mention in particular Apparitions inquiétantes, Strange Apparitions, by Anne-Cécile Bonan-Bourget. During the same period, the 90s, in France in particular, but not only, the Ali Review, edited by Philippe Bautz, was to play a significant role in the diffusion of animated poetry, poésie animée. Animated poetry introduces the temporality within the writing. So I will show capture, a video capture of an animated poetry by Philip Oates in 1990. Just the beginning of it. It's what Philip calls syntactic animation. I will not try to read it because it's specialized, so there are many, many ways of reading it. Okay, I think you have understood the principle. Finally, the role played by the internet network in the practices, in particular with the appearance of collective works, and because of the influence of graphic arts and digital arts, we now have participative or also contributive digital literary works. So in this work, it's a book of dead. You can write a collective book of dead, you're dead, and you write with others, your own book of dead. So it's a participative work. And also, you have now, like in many countries, participative narratives on social networks. So at present, I would say that two main tendencies are vivid in France. Performances of programmed and generated literature. For example, the performances by HP Process, Philippe Boinard, and Hortense Gauthier. So I don't have time to show a video, unfortunately. And the second tendency is online animated hypermedia pieces conceived for private reading. These works exploit at the same time the dynamic display of the text and the multimedia dimension, and they emphasize the interactivity with the reader. So, for example, Loss of Grasp is just an example. Of course, there are many others. And we have also in France, like in other countries, creations for tablets and smartphones. I just want to show a project I'm involved in right now. Here, it's called La Séparation, the separation. So I will not show the version for tablet or smartphone. We also have a version with the Kinect device for embodiment. And you will see the principle. We play with typefaces, with words. We can manipulate words, sorry. So, for instance, here, you can cut words. I will do it with my fingers. So. I can cut this word in half to make another word appear. So we call this guillotine font. There is, and we call the whole principle cutting edge poetry, because we cut words. And here there is a shadow font, and if I rub this word, so imagine this with your finger on a smartphone or a tablet, so it's very sensual and material, of course. So under shadow there is a swan. And here I can tear the word apart to make another word appear. So there are several principles, processes, and it will be a participative app. In the lab, you can type any word. Nohelia, give me a word.
Sky.
Sky. It's in French. Ciel. Ciel. Okay, and then now it can be in Spanish too, because we can put any dictionary here. And I will. Oh, I like this Fifi. Okay. And then I can try my manipulation. If I like the combination, I can save it and then edit my own text and put it, in the app for all the other users. So that's a project I'm involved in right now with a French poet and friend, Pierre Fournier. So last part of my presentation about the characteristics. So yeah, I wanted to say also that more generally now, digital literary creations are emphasizing a shift from interpretation to experience, from visual perception to bodily affection, moving to kinetic immersive, tactical, bodily, and sensual projects, but also creations that couple digital and physical space, for instance, locative narratives based on geolocalization. So last part. So what are the characteristics of digital literature in France, which might not be specific to France? Among the influences, let's underline the importance of linguistics, the importance of sound, visual, and concrete poetry before the computer era, the role of writing workshops, writing under Oulipo constraints, but not only, and also the introduction of computer science at school, notably in primary school in the 80s with a language. This language was like a construction game based on the manipulation of objects, and the computer appeared as a means to create and transform text. It was very important for French pupils. So current trends, so I emphasize what I've said before. According to Philip Boats, every digital literary work today tends to be hypertextual, generative, and animated. We may even say that the emphasis is now more on the animated dimension than on the hypertextual or generative dimension. And the other trend is that of performances inspired by contemporary visual and sound poetry. And thus, the Chartreuse, the National Center of the Writings for the Stage in the south of France, at Villeneuve-les-Avignon, regularly organizes probes, sondes, on the relationship between digital literature and writings for the stage. Concerning theory and creation, the influence of the theoreticians of digital literature, Jean-Pierre Balp for text generation, Philippe Boats for animated poetry, or Jean Clément for hyperfiction, has been significant in the creations. The theoreticians insist on the original status of a work of digital literature. It's neither an author's performance nor a fixed work, and thanks to theoretical papers, the role of the whole device and of the reader are better understood. Theoretically, we have in France a tension between two approaches of digital literature, corresponding to two different kinds of works. What we could call a surface approach. This approach focuses on what appears on the surface on the screen and analyzes the interactions of the reader with this surface. This corresponds to a literature of screen writings. And another approach, socio-technical device approach. I don't know how to translate dispositif in English, so the socio-technical device, I don't know. This approach is based on a certain conception of the way the digital medium is used, as well as the role of the program, considered as integral part of the work, and this corresponds to a literature of programmed forms. This second approach is maybe the most original one. This conception considers digital literature as a literature of frustration and failure, notably with Jean-Pierre Balp and Philippe Boats. And this failure is seen as the genuine material of digital literature and concerns two dimensions: the reader's failure. The failure is based notably on the competition between the temporality of animations and the temporality of the perception, interpretation process. And another way to stage this reader's failure is here, with Little Brush to Dust Fiction by Philippe Boats. So if I want to read, I have to move to brush the screen here. But if I act, if I move my cursor, I cannot read anymore. So here is the reader's failure. In a way, as Philippe Boats would say, reading prevents reading. And the author's failure, the bug, and the obsolescence are two expressions of the loss of grasp of the digital author. The author is in fact only the co-author of the program which is running, and this will be my last example. A very nice piece online by Alexandra Zammer, originally from Germany, but she works and writes in France and in French. In this work called Tramway, she speaks about the death of her father and the fact that neither her mother nor her could close the eyes of the dead body of the father. And this is the line that you see here animated. And the hypothesis of Alexandra is that with the growing speed of the computers, after a while, this line will not be able to be read anymore. So this online creation takes into account and poetizes the evolution of formats and systems. So as far as the works are concerned, I don't think we can speak of a French school of digital literature, considering the great variety of creations, and undoubtedly, the theoretical approach could be the distinctive characteristic of digital literature in France. Last slide to open the discussion. My talk focused on digital literature in France. The same exercise has been or could be done for every country. We can notice, for example, that hypertext fiction was at first mainly developed in the US and text generation in France, or that digital poetry in Brazil is particularly concerned with intersemiotic relationships between text, image, and sound, and of course also holo poetry with Eduardo Cac. Digital literature is based on each country's own conception of literariness, on each country's own conception of the digital medium, as well as the relation between the two, literariness and digital medium. So the following question remains open. Is digital literature a coherent international field or a mere collection of cultural specificities? Thank you.
Gracias, Serge.
Gracias, Serge. Soy fantastique. Gracias, Nohelia, por presentar también a Serge. Tenemos tiempo para 2 preguntas. Sé que hay muchísimas, nosotros también que queremos hacerle montones, entonces no sé. Qué difícil es. A ver, tú que voy para allá.
Hi, first of all, congrats. Just one question. In traditional literature, you're only a writer, but in electronic literature, you're not just a writer, you're a project manager. So the question is, how's your creative process?
So it's a very interesting question. I think there are different processes depending on writers. As you said, it's often collective work, That's why, I created a collective, called otras with Vincent. We are both writers and programmers, and Hervé Zelouda for the music design. My process is I start with the idea of an experiment I want for the reader. For instance, for loss of grasp, I wanted the reader or the user or interactor to interactively experiment the loss of grasp. And after this, I write the text, I imagine how to display with the multimedia dimension. But other authors that, for instance, Alexandra Zaimer, the last pieces called the Tramway, she writes the text first, and then she enters a process to integrate the multimedia dimension and the interactivity. So there are different ways, imagining this process.
Bueno, antes de dar la palabra a la segunda pregunta, queremos también recordarles que Loss of Grasp va a poder ser jugada, interactuada y vista en la exposición que inauguramos hoy en Universum a las 5 de la tarde. Va a haber un cuadro específico para disfrutar esta pieza de Serge Bouchardon. Y también vamos a tener la obra Opacité de Serge en CCU-Tlatelolco a partir del 12 de noviembre. Los invitamos a que vayan a las exposiciones a hacer un poco lo que hizo hoy Serge, pero también con nuestras propias caras, voces, textos no controlados, azarosos y cambiados. Entonces vamos a escoger otra pregunta. A ver, aquí.
Gracias. Hi, yeah, congratulations. My question is about the author. There is a text, I don't remember now the name of the author, it's a very famous one, the writer, The Death of the Author. It was a French, yeah. So about some comment about the apparent fading out of the author as we know it traditionally, because there is a lot of people involved in digital literature, not just the person who writes the text or the one who makes it possible. So it's a team, and not about about I don't know, philosophically maybe about like the essence of the authorship. Now it's different maybe. How is it for you?
Yeah. So the death of the author, it's both Michel Foucault and Roland Barthes, because they both, wrote a paper with this title. As we said before, it's now almost always, collective enterprise. But it's like, in the cinema industry, you have different roles. So this reconfigure, of course, the role of the traditional author in literature in several ways. For instance, I didn't have time to show automatic text generation example, but the reconfiguration here of the relationship between the author and the reader is this one, is that I read words that have not been written by an author, but by, generation program, and the author becomes a meta author. Now the question is, do I want to read words that have not been thought, by a singular author? That's why, I'm not very keen on automatic text generation. And for other pieces like hypertextual or animated pieces, I think there is this tension between the desire of delete the hierarchical position of the author with the reader, and we have this in hypertext. So reader can make choices, control, but at the same time, like in loss of grasp, we play with this fantasy, of having the reader being in control, participate, write the text himself. So I think we have this tension, and that's what interests me in digital literature. Is of course we don't want to be an author like in traditional literature, but at the same time we don't want the reader to have all the power. So this tension is staged in several works, and also as I said, with the author's failure, because we don't, with the bugs, the obsolescence of formats and hardware and software, sometimes we have the impression not to control many things with digital literature, and this is another way to reconfigure the role of the author and the writer, and I quite like this actually, to be challenged by the machine.
Okay, porque somos super laxos. Una tercera pregunta.
Thank you. In Western art, the author has been traditionally very present, whereas in Eastern art or Eastern literature, the author has had less of a relevance. There has been more the concept of collective writing. So my question is, are you familiar with what is going on in, for example, Japan, that is traditionally very comfortable with the idea of the collective author in terms of digital literature? Is something happening there that is different to Western digital literature?
Yeah, it's interesting because in the digital literature community, the ELO conference, for instance, Electronic Literature Organization Conference, the last one was in Bergen in August. Now we have a great variety and diversity of countries and languages. South America, of course, Eastern Europe, Poland, but we don't have so many authors from the East. I mean Asia, and I don't know why actually. So I'm not so familiar with this, and I don't know so many authors except Young Hai Chang Industries, the couple, you know, South Korean and French. I think there is a piece in the exhibit by Young Hai Chang Industries. But so I'm not so familiar with the authors or collective authors from Asia, for instance. But I think this is a trend to be more collective and participative. And that's why, you know, in my next project, La Séparation, the separation, we want, you know, people to to have their own creative practices and to create with the typefaces that we created, you know, guillotine font and so on, their own text, and so that, you know, the process will be more collective and participative. I think this is a major trend, and this is what Amarant also said yesterday, that, you know, she also wants, you know, the reader now to take part of the process. Maybe I'm too long in my answers.
Muchísimas gracias, Serge.